going to be our gaffer today. We're live streaming today, so if at any point you guys have any questions, you can go ahead and type them in the comments. And we got somebody behind us that can read them to us. We're doing a little bit of a special demo today. Colin's working with cane today. And cane is sort of one of the traditional aspects of glass blowing. So when they started blowing glass in ancient Italy, they figured out that they could pull thin strands of glass. So this is the color of cane we're working with today. There's some color on the inside that you can see, but then there's clear on top, so there will be a clear spacer. But then we can get even more complex with things like complex cane. So this is many canes rolled up and then pulled into another cane. So how we pull cane is basically we just take a nice hot glob of glass, and since hot glass has some really elastic properties, we can stretch it and stretch it and stretch it. So Colin's pre-paneled this cane today for us. Really quickly, I want to go through the equipment. So Colin's at our reheating chamber. So the reheating chamber is really important because as soon as we come out of the furnace, everything starts to cool down a little bit. So we got to be able to heat it back up. Our big guy is our furnace. So this is our furnace. This is a gas and forced air. This holds about 500 pounds of glass. And inside there's a big ceramic crucible or a bowl. And inside there we can just throw cold glass in, bring it all the way up to that 2100 degree temperature, and then we can start working with the glass. While Colin's getting ready, he's actually going to build this on a blowpipe. So he's going to make something called a collar to roll up our cane. So these are our stainless steel blowpipes. They're made out of stainless steel because it's a really poor conductor of heat. So you'll notice Colin and I aren't wearing gloves most of the time. Colin's got a nice Kevlar one on now to protect him. But these are hollow, so we got a nice little opening here, and that's what Colin can physically blow through. Hot glass also only sticks to hot things, so we preheat all of our pipes, and that allows us to gather the glass up. Colin's going ahead and laying out his canes. We got a nice pink-purple oscillating pattern. And that plate is hot, so if Colin goes and touches it, it's probably already pretty warm, so he can really easily burn himself. So he's got to be quick when laying the canes. The hardest part of working with hot glass is that you can never physically touch it, right? So even at this point, Colin can't lay his cane pattern out. But we preheat that plate because if we go and we take it to our reheating chamber, that's enough of a temperature difference that it can thermally shock the canes and can cause them to crack and break. When glass is this thin, it can be sort of really fragile. If it was a little bit thicker, it would be a little bit easier to work with, but we don't want to crack any of these guys. So Colin's preheated his plate. He can lay out his pattern. Slowly but surely. This is the hard part, because then you like misplace one cane and you got to rearrange them all, and then you got to scoot them all off, and then they're already hot. And this is going to be the outside of our vessel, right? So Colin has this really cool tool called the Pie Caliper. And that's going to allow him to take a measurement. It like divides by pi to make the circle geometry. And will allow him to get that measurement of how much glass he needs to make it the length of those canes. This is nice because we don't have to worry about wall thickness so much, right? The wall thickness is already... Did you flip it already? Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take this guy. I know our forks are crazy heavy. Can I get a second door? Sorry. Slightly too big. And I'm just going to heat these canes up so they get a little bit tacky, and then we'll flip our plate around. Okay. A little bit more. Let's look at that. You want a little more?
You're good with compressing them, right?
Yeah, I can do that. So Colin's gonna flip our plate around because we're going into the burner side of the reheating chamber. So we gotta flip the canes so that way they heat nice and evenly. And we can talk a little bit about the reheating chamber anatomy after we get this rolled up. Ready? So while Colin's gonna get his cane together, or his, what is the word, collar together, he's just gonna take a little bit of glass and physically blow through the pipe. And that's gonna allow him to make sort of a skin around the pipe head to roll these canes up on. Colin's going in with his jacks, making sure his pipe's nice and round. I'm going to give these guys a little squish, make sure they're nice and stuck together. Yeah, we're good. Boop. We're going to take these off so Colin has a place to roll. And then we'll give them one more heat. Good. That's the nice thing about thin cane is we don't have to heat them up too much. Yeah, I think so. Oh, I lied. One of them popped. Hold on. That little one cracked. Let me grab it. Thank you. We had a tiny crack. We'll add one more.
Just keep the Ferretti on there for now.
Okay. Took it off too early. I was too excited. We got a little bit of glow, a little bit of soften. What do you want to do?
We'll do one more quick one, and then I'll do a compress with the pipe and some tweezers.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, 1 sec.
Shaky. One more.
Do one more good one. Let him get some.
Okay.
Before we question,
Yeah.
what are you actually looking for while you're heating?
So I want the edges of those canes to soften up a little bit. So that's how I know that they're hot. Since the reheating chamber is glowing orange sort of from all directions, you can't really tell based on color. So you want to look for the glass to physically start to move. Okay. So now we got a nice little glow, but you can't really see that in the reheating chamber. But I can see these little soft edges. Colin's giving it a good squish, making sure there's no air bubbles. You're going on this roll, and you can roll that cane right up. I'm gonna get this guy out of the way for him, and then he's gonna seal that up. Sort of like a zipper. All right, so we got all those tiny strands we looked at before. And we're slowly gonna push them together. And hot glass sticks to hot glass really well. So there's no sort of preheating that Colin has to do to get it to stick to itself. He's dusting off any kiln dust. And now he's got to zip up that edge. This is the tricky part, because if he disrupts his pattern at all, he's going to have to totally redo it. With cane, you really only get one shot to roll it up. And then Colin will stitch that seam together. And now it looks like it's just made out of striped glass. So if we were to look at how we pulled cane, Colin would have picked up a chunk of something called color bar. And I can show you guys what that looks like beforehand. So Collins was working with something that I would call veil cane. I've heard people call it overlay cane. There's a dense color underneath that would be made out of this color bar. But then you put another color on top to add a little bit of dimension. Because glass color comes in two different ways. It comes transparent, so that means you can see through it. So all of the window glass in all of the buildings that you've ever been to, you can see right through it, that's transparent. Versus the core underneath the veil cane is an opaque color. So as we start to inflate this out, you'll really be able to see the difference between the colors. We can't really use frit or powder with cane because as Colin's gonna start to blow this out, that frit would get too thin and then it would never really work. So Colin's gonna go in, he's gonna make sure there's no gaps in those canes, and then he's gonna physically seal the end off. The nice thing about working with cane is that we never actually have to pop a bubble. It sort of makes its own bubble. And you're set up with even wall thickness because Colin's making sure there's no bubbles rolling across our marver table. It's called a marver because it was the Italian word for marble. So back in the day, these would have been made out of marble. But now we have stainless steel, which sort of does the same function while also being much less expensive and much more accessible. So stainless steel is sort of made out of a special way of making metal that makes it so it sucks that heat in just because of its molecular structure. We're going to twist it up? Okay. So the cool thing about cane is that as Colin's turning, it's really controlling the direction of the cane. So you can see him turning in just one direction and then scooting back across the marver. That's going to spin our cane around a little bit. Makes it look like a candy cane. I think one of the harder things of people who make cane work is trying to keep the cane straight, right? Because as we start to work with the material, you'll notice Colin's going to move it in a lot of different ways. And we like to say that glass is a memory, so it remembers every time he touches it with a tool or every time he rolls it across the marver. So it's going to stay that twisted as we start working. Colin might do that again, maybe? Yeah, a couple more times. The tough thing about working with the cane right now is since it's already so thin, hot glass is going to stay hotter the thicker it is. So there's not a lot of insulation in there. It's really thin. It wants to cool down really quickly. So Colin's got to go back in our reheating chamber. He's going to open that back up a little bit. That way he can keep that nice even wall thickness. And once he's got it nice and twisted, he's going to go ahead and cut off that end piece. Some people will save these and use them later on in their work, so you could roll these back up later. The nice thing about glass is that it's infinitely recyclable. So if we let these things cool all the way down, we can heat them back up to working temperature and then roll them back into more and more glass. We're actually working with soda lime glass or soft glass. So anything that's made out of soft glass, we can then reincorporate into our studio. So I've seen people like work with some types of bottles. You can make bottles work in here because that's all soft glass. Where it gets tricky is things like Pyrex are made out of borosilicate glass. So our glass is soda lime glass. It's got a silica base, All glasses have a silica base, and all of the rocks on like this planet and Mars all are made out of silica. But what makes our glass special is that we don't really want to have to melt pure silica. That's going to have to take us to about 4,000 degrees, and 2100 is already hot enough. So we add a little bit of flux in there, and in soda lime glass, that's that soda ash. And that soda ash lets us melt it at a much lower temperature. Fluxes come in all different types of mediums. People who work with metal use fluxes. We use fluxes. There's all kinds of fluxes. Anybody who's got to melt anything is using a flux. And then the lime part of our glass is limestone. Ohio's a really great state for glass just because of how prevalent the limestone is in the rock. It makes it so that the glass isn't water soluble. So if any of our ancient collection we took in a bucket, we stuck it in a bucket, over time it's going to break down really quickly because it's just soluble to the water. So that's how it gets that rainbow effect. But our glass we can keep in a bucket forever and it'll be just fine. So now Colin's got that closed up. We're going to condense it back down a little bit, make it a little bit thicker, a little bit easier to manage. And Colin has enough glass for maybe like a cup right now. Something a little bit smaller than what he wants. So we'll let this set up a little bit. Make sure the walls are nice and thick, and then we'll take one more dip on top of this. Now the hard part's done. Now we just get to the glass blowing part. Colin has this lovely blow hose he can hook up to the end of his pipe. Normally when you come in and you see us doing demonstration, you'd see us working a lot more closely. Right now we sort of have had to adapt a little bit. So Colin has this lovely noodle that he can blow in and out of. And that's just a piece of surgical tubing that we can then hook up to the bottom, and it sort of just blows with Colin's regular breath. Some facilities are using things like compressed air and foot pedal systems, but those can be a little bit unnerving. You can really easily put too much air in there too quickly. And when we're working, we want to make sure that we keep it light, right? Because we can always blow out glass smooth into one bubble. And if Colin has too deep of a ridge and we go back into the furnace, that ridge is going to trap an air bubble. And then we'll have a big old bubble in the side of Colin's bottle, which I know is not what he's looking for. And the nice thing about sort of reheating glass is that as it cools down, the surface of the glass is the first thing that gets hot, right? Because it's the first thing that goes in the reheating chamber and the last thing that comes out. So since this ripple is just on the outside, Colin can let that set up quite a bit, like we just did, and then he can go back in and melt that ridge out. And hopefully it won't disturb too much of the bubble. Colin might have to do a little bit of blowing, but it'll be all right. Oh, I see that ridge. Colin's gonna go in our marver, make sure it's nice and smooth. Yeah, I think so. I guess we'll find out. So Colin's gonna let that set up a little bit. Now that we've already got air trapped in there, Colin wants to make sure this is nice and cold when we go back into our furnace. If his bubble ever gets too hot, the heat just from the furnace can cause it to change shape and sort of collapse back down on itself. Colin's doing a price check, making sure he can fit in that block. Getting himself ready. Are you gonna do a full gather or just a strip?
Probably a full gather.
Okay. Colin's gonna come in, and when he's gathering, it's sort of like taking a chopstick into honey, right? The glass isn't solid in there, it's very molten. And when he comes out, you'll notice he has to keep turning and keep everything nice and on center. When we're working with the canes, they never really get super, super molten. But now this is sort of our first gather of fresh glass. Paper? Okay. Colin's using his newspaper, which is a really nice tool because normally, right, we can't touch the material. So this is the closest we'll ever get to physically being able to feel the side of the glass. Colin's doing a little extra shaping. And when we first come out of the furnace is a really important time. Just because that core is so set up, we can really move the glass on the outside of our bubble and have nice control over how our object looks. Colin's got a nice egg going. There goes our little bit. I don't remember what those things are called.
Triggers.
What?
I've heard them called triggers, F-R-R.
Oh, I've heard those are something else.
Or
They're like little globby things that you stick to cookie feet. It's just waste glass. I know somebody who makes fridge magnets out of them. That's sort of the best use I've seen for it. Now Colin can start inflating our shape up. So Colin's going to right now focus on something called bottom weighting. And he already started a little bit with his newspaper, but you can really see him focus his hand sort of towards the bottom of our bubble. When we talk about our bubble, we sort of talk about it like a body, right? So the part that's closest to the pipe is our neck, and then we have our shoulder. And I think Colin's making a bottle. Are we putting a bottleneck on this? A little bottle flask? So Colin's gonna have to pull a neck out on this. So Colin wants to make sure his shoulder's really, really nice and thin. So he's probably gonna go over to our marver table now, our big one. And he's gonna really marver on the bottom of this. And I mentioned it earlier, but we really like to say that glass has a memory. So it remembers every time we touch it. So this is a big memory for it. We're gonna really cool that bottom down so as we inflate, it's gonna start to spread it out a little bit. And we're really just focusing on where we want our air to go. So Colin wants it nice and at the top. So he's gonna force it to go to the top. Alright. Okay, let me get a big paddle. If I can find one. It's really small though. Okay. It's your forearm. So Colin's gonna pull our neck out. I'm gonna give him a little bit of a shield. I know he forgot his sleeve today, so it can get a little spicy. So I got this nice wooden paddle. And this just protects his forearm a little bit. But he's physically pulling our neck out. So you can see him sort of grabbing a little bit of glass, and then he's gonna physically pull and stretch it out until we have the length of neck that he wants for his bottle. This is sort of one of our trickier heats because Colin has to stay nice and on center. Then he's gonna put our constriction line in. So this is another one of our few core principles. You can't get this thing off the pipe unless you have a means to do so, and this is our jack line. When you first start blowing glass, you really just learn to put jack lines in because nothing in the museum has a pipe stuck to the end of it, right? So Colin wants to make sure that's nice and tight. He wants to make sure his bottleneck's nice and straight. He's gonna give it a paper. And now we got that neck nice and set in. So when we work in here, we're working from the top down. So later on, we'll flip this guy around and we'll open that neck up a little bit.
Can I get the right side door?
Yeah,
Please?
of course.
Thank you.
I'm gonna open this door up for Colin. These doors are really nice because as we start to open them, you can really feel the heat difference. And it gets hot enough in here. I like to keep all the doors closed for as long as possible. So once you start opening that second set, it's when it gets really, really hot. So now Colin just wants to heat the bottom section of our bubble. If we get that top too hot, that neckline in there is going to move around a lot. And Colin already has enough work to do with his forearms and turning. Colin's going to use a little bit of gravity, stretch it out a little bit. And then he's going to use his newspaper to physically shape the bottom of this thing as he's blowing. And that can sort of change the profile of our object. This is really nice because, remember, glass has that heat memory. And if Colin were to use his stainless steel jacks, it's going to cause that glass to cool down a lot faster. So since we just have this waterlogged paper, gives him a little bit more working time. Are we putting a foot on this? Nope. Okay. Just checking. I wanted to make sure.
Keep some meat down there.
That sounds good.
Probably stretch it, blow it, and then we'll cork it.
Oh yeah, I forgot we're corking it. So Colin's gonna blow it out a little bit more. The tough thing about bottles is that our neck is really long, and now our shoulder became our neck, and now we got a new shoulder. So we gotta blow that shoulder up a little bit. Make everything nice and even. Colin's gonna go back on with his paper. And when he's blowing, he's sort of like a balloon, right? When that glass is really, really fresh, if you blow really hard, it's just gonna pop. We wanna blow a little bit gently. You ready? So now we're gonna use our lovely corks, which are just made of cork, and we're gonna flatten this out. So I'm gonna get a little bit of heat. Not too crazy?
Not too crazy.
Okay.
I'll probably have to pop into it. You go, you tuck the shoulder behind more.
Back here?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're just heating that bottom up. Colin said not too crazy. Okay, let's try this. I'm gonna cap the end of my pipe, or cap the end of the pipe with my finger. And Colin's gonna physically push and flatten with our corks. I didn't say capping, I'm capping. So now we can get it nice and flat. You want some more heat? I'm good.
Yep.
We're gonna give it a little bit more heat and clean it up. You want to clean it up again?
Yeah, we're gonna clean it up, and I'm gonna be the one to have to fucking everything.
Okay. We're gonna do that one more time. Colin's got his nice blow hose. He's gonna puff it out a little bit. This is one of the challenging aspects of pandemic glass blowing. So Colin's gonna blow a little bit, and then he can take his newspaper and make it nice and clean. Yeah. That looks pretty good. There's a little bit of a dimple on one side, but meh. So now we got that nice and flattened. This is nice because you can see the cane from both sides, right?
We'll get the bottom.
Because of that transparent glass. You got the bottom? You want to paddle?
Yeah.
Okay. So now we're gonna clean that bottom up, right? Because the issue with the round object is that it's not gonna sit on the table. So we gotta make a place for the bottle to make a really nice point of contact with the table. So if you look at like a wine bottle or a beer bottle, underneath it has that nice indent and that nice ring. That's our contact point. We wanna make sure that's nice and clean. Especially with a flat object like this, it can be really prone to tipping.
Okay.
So I'm gonna press. I'm not pushing super hard, pretty gently. Colin's blowing a little bit, making sure we got that nice indent. That way we can make nice contact with the table. Colin can use the back of his jacks. Really push that indent in.
Okay, we're good.
We're good.
Take 20.
So now we're gonna flip this around. So I'm gonna make Colin something called a punty. And punty is the Italian word for point or bridge. So if we were working at a factory and we were making like thousands of bottles, we could really easily knock this off here, cut off the top, polish it, and that could be sort of a functional way of making a bottle. But I know Colin wants to have a little bit more control over how this is gonna get open. So I'm gonna make him a little punty that we can connect onto the bottom. I just get a little bit of glass. This is where I get really quiet because I have to focus. If I make Colin a bad punty, it can really easily either fuse onto the bottom of the bottle or cause it to fall off prematurely. So I want that nice round tip with a little bit of a point, so that way Colin sort of knows where he's sticking me on. Give it a good cool down. That way we can grab nice and far apart on the pipe. When we're holding the pipe, it's sort of like a hockey stick, right? We want to have a nice wide grip. Gives us quite a bit more support. And I'm going to come over here. Colin's going to stick me on. Sorry, I'm a little cold. I can take that. I'm good. Colin's going to use a couple drops of water, a little bit of a tap, and we'll go right back into our reheating chamber. So this glass was just cold enough for us to physically break it and sort of shatter it like regular glass. So we got to give it a good flash. Colin's going to make sure it's nice and on center. When you're making pottery, you take like a pottery class right in the beginning, you do that move where you center all the clay. We sort of have to do that the entire time we're working with the piece. So this is a really important moment for centering. If Colin starts to open this and his punty's off center, it'll start to open totally crooked, and then it's not really super functional. So now we can start opening that top up. This is sort of our longest reheat. So normally Colin's up and down and up and down. We take really short heats, it's not a long time. Up here, we're up here for about a minute, and for me that feels like forever. Glass blowing is sort of a very demanding art form on your body. So you see Colin up and down a lot. It's a great workout for your forearms. And you would think his right hand's the hand doing all the tooling, right? That should be the hand that's stronger. But really our left hands are doing all of the power work. So they're basically the motor for the pipe the entire time that we're working. Colin's gonna get that nice and soft. You can start to see it sort of soften up on the edge a little bit, just like with our canes. When you break glass, it's got that sharp edge. And once we see that start to soften up, we know it's go time. You'll notice Colin turning a little bit funny. It's a little bit harder to turn a shape like this because glass naturally wants to be in that round spherical shape. So as soon as we start to push on it and make it angular, it's never quite happy. It's always a little bit more work for your body. So now we got that nice bright heat glow. And this is a time where you can really see the heat difference in the back to the front. So Colin's going to do something called a Tweeze and Trim. He's using his tweezers, which are basically just big stainless steel versions of the tweezers you use at home. And he's physically pulling that neck out. He's making himself a little handle on the edge, and now he's going to physically lengthen it. He's got 2 sets of tweezers. You'll hear Colin dip his tweezers in the bucket. As they start to sort of touch the material, they can heat up over time. And if they get too hard, they start to stick. So then you can get stuck, and then you gotta get yourself out of stuck, which is a little bit scary. But then you can just dip them in some water. Colin's gonna make another constriction line, just like we did with our jack line. And that's gonna allow us to break this off. The top of this, we call it a floret. So we could leave that on. Some of the like Tiffany glass that we have will have nice little florets on the top. But I know Colin's not really looking for that. So we're gonna just amputate that right off. So Colin's gonna use our little jack line principle, and he's gonna cut a nice little line in there. So that way there's enough of a heat difference between the top of the bottle and the back. We got plenty of tweezers. So he's gonna take his diamond shears, do a little grab, and I'm gonna give it the teeniest tap. Whoop. And then sometimes that happens.
There's a torch on the back side.
So we're gonna heat this punny back up. Yes, please. It's always something on Friday, Colin.
Take a quick heat. You're gonna have to go for it.
What?
You gotta go stick to it.
Okay.
You good? Got it?
Yeah, I got it. We're gonna give it a nice healthy flash. That way it doesn't go through too much thermal shock. No cracking so far. That's the trick with the punny, right? It's that connection that's designed to fail. Oh, there we go.
Oh, yeah, look,
Took the floret off.
we're gonna roll with that.
It happens. Especially with a long shape like this, that's the tricky part, right? Because you want to keep your punny hot enough that it stays nice and happy, but not so hot that it's going to keep moving. So we can just tweeze and trim it again. It's no big deal.
I'm just gonna trim it.
You're just going to trim it? Okay.
Finish it.
Sort of spot heat in just that one area. And then he can go in and cut that sort of part that he doesn't like off. What?
That was wacky.
Yeah, it happens. We like to keep it fun on Fridays.
Yeah.
It didn't fall on the ground, so like, that's something. At least the punty broke off nice the first time.
Yeah.
That makes me feel good.
Can you go 2 for 2?
I don't know. You might need to cut into this one a little bit. I sort of gooped it on there. Colin's gonna go in with his shears and he's gonna physically cut that extra bit off. So that way we can get it back to nice and flat. And there's that little bit of white stuff on the edge. That's from him physically cutting that glass. But once we take it back to our reheating chamber, it'll melt in pretty nicely. And then no one will ever know that happened, except for the fact that it's on YouTube forever, Colin.
Yeah. Famous.
So we'll get that all the way back up to working temp. Yep, and then we'll even this out. Colin's gonna use his jacks sort of the opposite way from the constriction line, right? He's gonna use them sideways, sort of like a mold. And this little table is really all of the space that we have for all of our tools. So all of our tools have to be super multifunctional. Yeah, that never happened. It looks great. Nobody would know. And now we got that nice and finished. Colin's gonna boost a little heat back into that punny. You wanna touch it again or are you ready to take it off? You ready to take it off? Okay.
Probably a few flashes, but
Okay. Maybe some extra ones. So Colin's gonna start doing something called flashing down. And the air in the room is too cold for the glass, right? We saw that with the punty. If it ever gets too cold, it's gonna break. So we're gonna slowly even out the heat throughout the entire bubble, or our bottle now. Colin's gonna give that punty a little bit of extra heat, and we're gonna use the same principle that we used to knock this off of the jack line to knock it off of the punty. So I'm gonna put on my super cool outfit. Oh, thanks. So we're going to load this away in our annealing oven. And annealing is sort of the process of taking the stress out of the glass, right? Because it was already really hot, it fell. It's had a lot of stress. It's been a stressful day for it. On this one? So we're going to take this off. So we're going to come over to our knockoff table. Colin's going to use a little bit of water just like we did with the jack line. Hopefully our punty comes off nice. It can be risky when you got to reattach. Colin's going to give it a little tap. An extra tap. We got a chunker.
Yeah, I was unfortunately broken.
So we can put it away. Boop, boop, boop. It was nice. So that's going to cool down in our annealing oven, and that's sitting at about 900 degrees. The thickest part of that is that bottom, and it is not very thick, so that'll cool down for about 24 hours. If we look at much thicker glass, we have that large cast bench in the ancient gallery. That's about this thick at its thickest point, so that cooled down for about 11 months. So different applications of glass are going to have different sort of cooling times. So we'll let that sit overnight, and we'll take it out tomorrow morning. If you guys have any questions, you can comment them to Misha, and he can read them back to me. Otherwise, we'd like to thank our sponsors, Owens, Illinois. And we're doing this. The museum is open. The galleries are open, so you can come in. We're open Wednesday through Sunday. And then we'll be doing these demonstrations live streamed Wednesday, Friday, and Sunday. So if you guys have any questions, you can answer them to Misha. Otherwise, have a great day.